Session for the Aurora City Council for Monday, August 1st, 2022 is called to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Kaufman,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Bergen,
Here.
Councilmember Coombs,
Present.
Councilmember Gardner,
Here.
Councilmember Jurenski, Councilmember Lawson,
Here.
Councilmember Marcano,
Present.
Councilmember Medina,
Here.
Councilmember Murillo,
Present.
Councilmember Stenberg,
Here.
and Councilmember Zvonik.
Here.
There's a quorum.
There's no mayor's updated. Are there any issue updates? Seeing none, item 1C, Metro District update and discussion. Brian Matisse will have 15 minutes to be followed by Christopher Fellows for another 15 minutes, and then we'll have 30 minutes for questions and discussion. Mr. Matisse, you are now recognized for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor Kaufman. Is it possible there? I can share my screen just a second, please. Thank you, Mayor Kaufman and councilors. The topic for the study session presentation was rather open-ended, but I wanted to focus on recent independent research on metro districts and objective criteria that can assist council in approving responsible development using metro districts, while also protecting Aurora residents and taxpayers from excessive risk. I want to begin with a brief overview of my presentation. First, I want to point out that I personally believe that metro districts can be a useful infrastructure financing tool, but not all proposed metro districts make economic sense. And you, City Council, are the first line of defense for the citizens and taxpayers from districts with excessive risk. City Council has the duty under state law to scrutinize each district that is created to determine if there is a need for service in the district boundaries, whether service can be economically provided, and whether the district's tax base is sufficient to allow it to discharge the debt. I want to go over a couple of, present you some metrics that I think you should consider. First, the debt limit per residential unit should approximate the cost of infrastructure, which the Home Builders Association estimates at $30,000 to $40,000 per residential unit. Second, the debt to assessed value projection at final build out should be approximately 30% to 50% of the assessed value of the district when fully built out. Third, districts need to have set boundaries so that both council as well as the taxpayers can determine what the risk is. And finally, financial plans that allow for compounding of interest or high interest junior or cash flow debt should be discouraged because they dramatically increase the homeowner risk. Now, metropolitan district financing makes sense if the developed lot cost to home builders is less than it would be without a metro district. Now, if a developer uses the metro district to pay for the infrastructure and then sells the lots to the builder at full market price, there's no down payment savings to the home buyers. And this is what's important here. The developer is not necessarily the same as the home builder. It's really the home builder that purchases the lots from the developer. And it only makes sense if the home builder can purchase those lots at a savings. In addition, the interest rate on the metro district debt needs to be less than or comparable to mortgage interest rates. It doesn't make sense to have a district charging taxpayers 8% interest if the home buyers could have financed that at 3.5%, 4.5%, 5% mortgage rates. And finally, authorized debt that the council approves needs to be discharged in a reasonable time frame. Now, one of the important considerations is that the state legislature requires the city to disapprove a district service plan unless each of the following is presented. and that's in CRS 32.12032. The city must show that there is a need for service in the proposed district's area that is not adequately served by existing government. The proposed special district has to be able to provide economical and sufficient service. And the area, and this is important, D is the most important, the area to be included in the proposed special district must have or will have the financial ability to discharge the proposed indebtedness. Now, if a district consists of a postage stamp, which will never have any residents in it, it can't possibly satisfy provision A because there will never be a need for service in a postage stamp district that doesn't have any residents. Similarly, if you don't know what the area is going to be and the tax base of that proposed district on build out, you can't determine whether or not it has the financial ability to satisfy its debt. Now, even if all these criteria are satisfied, the city may nonetheless disapprove the service plan if the city council in its discretion finds that the creation of the special district is not in the best interests of the area to be served. Now, one of the important considerations in approving a metro district, given the importance of affordable housing, is whether the proposed metro district makes housing more affordable or less affordable. The Colorado Association of Home Builders on their website recently estimated that the public infrastructure costs for a new development range from $30,000 to $40,000 per home. Now, when approving a proposed metro district's debt structure, City Council should keep this number in mind. A March 2021 study by Anderson Economics Group showed that metro districts lower the down payment required by about $5,800, but over the long run, they increase the overall housing costs by an average of $16,200 per home. That's because it results in much higher taxes over the duration of the debt. And in addition, the Anderson Economic Group reports that for districts where homes are not sold as quickly as planned, overall housing costs increase by an average of $50,000 per home. I list the source here, the Anderson Economic Group. This was a study in March of 2021 on metro district impacts on housing costs, commissioned by the Fort Collins, Greeley, Longmont, and Loveland Association of Realtors. The Anderson Economic Group recommends careful scrutiny by county and municipal governments, such as the city of Aurora, to reduce the risks to homeowners. Now, there are some indicators that the city council should use in determining whether there's excessive risks, one of which I've already mentioned, which is if the infrastructure costs in the proposed service plan substantially exceed $30,000 to $50,000 per lot for residential development, if they're $30,000 to $50,000 is probably reasonable. A little buffer is okay to allow for inflation, maybe $50,000 or $60,000 per lot. But recently, this council has approved several service plans where the authorized debt per home that is projected to be developed is in the range of $300,000 to $1 million or more per home. There's no excuse for imposing that kind of risk on home buyers when it is far more than the infrastructure cost to be developed. Similarly, the authorized debt to assessed value ratio at final build-out is critical. Under current state law, unlimited mill levy general obligation debt must have a debt to assessed value ratio of less than 50% in order to be issued, and less than 30% debt to assessed value ratio on complete build out is considered well capitalized. So I would urge the city council to require that on final build out, the districts should have a debt to assessed value ratio not more than the range of 30 to 50%. Finally, council and the taxpayers need to know what property will be in what metro district's tax base. This is particularly important when you have a multiple district service plan where there may be 10 or 12 different districts, 10 or 12 different government entities you're creating at once. You need to know which property is eventually going to be in which district's boundaries to determine whether the tax base is sufficient or not. And inclusion or exclusion of a significant tax base from the service plan that's been approved should require a service plan amendment approved by council to protect the taxpayers and the residents of Aurora from possible abuse. Finally, I want to point out a couple of examples here of some risk in Aurora debt that's already been approved. This is an estimated debt service payment structure in my materials that is from the South Aurora Regional Improvement Authority, SARIA. These are bonds that were issued in 2018, December of 2018. You'll notice that in this particular estimated debt service structure, $10.45 million of net project revenue was generated, and the district incurred $11.25 million of debt service payments because there's about $800,000 cost of the underwriter, the attorneys, et cetera, like that. You'll notice that for the first 15 years, from 2019 until 2034, the interest was not sufficient to pay the debt. It was not sufficient projected to even amount to the interest payments. And so the interest compounds and compounds and compounds for years until eventually in 2033 and 34, it reaches numbers like $1.7 million of interest only per year compounding. The ultimate cost over a 22-year period of that $10.45 million of net project capital turns out to be $28.3 million. That's an excessive interest cost. That is not economically practical. And I submit that these kind of models are setting the districts up for failure. They're setting the taxpayers up for an outrageous cost. I also want to point out in your financial plan, this is from the model service plan in Aurora. And I forget which district this is. I just pulled one of the recent districts that have been recently approved. And you'll notice that they have in the financial plan, in the model service plan, a maximum debt that can be permitted. And it says here, the total debt the district each specific district shall be permitted to issue is $4 billion. Now, remember the number, if it costs about $40,000 of infrastructure per home, $4 billion would require something in the vicinity of 100,000 homes to be built for this district to make economic sense. This is an excessive amount of debt that I think the city council needs to ask. Why are we approving, $4 billion of debt for a district where this is going to total perhaps millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt per home? Also, I want to point out that in order to have transparency and for the taxpayers, the home buyers to know what's going on, you have to have a determined amount of debt. This is an example of one of the forms filed with the Colorado Department of Local Affairs for an Aurora Metropolitan District. And you'll notice that when this debt was issued, it was indeterminate amount. It was an advanced reimbursement agreement with pledged revenues. And it's impossible to know how much debt is ultimately going to be borrowed because the document filed with the Department of Local Affairs provided for not applicable, an unknown principal amount of debt, an unknown interest rate, an unknown rating of the debt, and an unknown final maturity date. How can a taxpayer know what they are purchasing if you allow districts to have indeterminate amount of debt, such as this district? Finally, in your packet, there's an excellent article, excellent white paper that was prepared in December of 2016 by the Colorado Future Center, a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan institution affiliated with Colorado State University on metro districts. This nonpartisan agency concluded that some of the metro district structures that were being used were not in the best interest of the residents or business owners and effectively served not just to pay for infrastructure costs, but instead to maximize developer profits while shifting the risk of development to taxpayers. At page 11 in the packet, it indicates clearly creative amendments to Colorado's laws have led to novel approaches for not only minimizing risk to developers and maximizing their return on investment, but also keeping control of future government decisions affecting their operations. Future residents and property owners cannot become obstacles while development plans are implemented by allowing the development company to maintain control of the government undertaking. And it goes on, and this is where your role is as city council. County and municipal governing boards, as well as district courts, have allowed this practice, which appears to only benefit development interests, potentially at the expense of the ultimate consumer, whether a resident or a business owner. Thank you, Mayor and Council. That concludes my presentation. I urge Council to responsibly approve metro districts while at the same time protecting taxpayers through some of these metrics.
So where do I go here?
Thank you, Mr. Fellows. You are recognized for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm gonna try and exceed my technological abilities and boot up my presentation here. I'll hit P.
Share. Slideshow.
Good.
Ask if they can see.
Mayor and Council, I hope you can see my presentation. And without Cheryl's help, I couldn't have gotten that done. Thanks for the chance to speak this evening. And this is a subject I enjoy chatting about. I've been involved in the land development business in the Front Range of Denver. This is my 38th year. I've been involved with special district matters since 1986. And I'll go through my presentation, I think, pretty quickly because a lot of the issues I have to say, I think council's already familiar with, and I think Mr. Matisse already hit on some of the positive points. I think districts are very important. I think they can lower that cost of housing. I think they can increase the quality of amenities and improvements in a community. I think they can help finance regional improvements and regional projects, which are otherwise not financeable. I think they can help finance projects that need financing or maintenance over a long period of time. Metro districts have been in Colorado since the late 1800s. Right now, there's, depending on whose source you want to find, there are about 1,800 active districts in Colorado. Total current debt of districts is, again, depending on who you want to believe, about $12.3 billion in debt currently financed with metro districts, about 2,500 bond transactions. The top 20 selling residential communities in the Front Range all utilize some form of metro district financing. I think this is indicative of the size and the magnitude and the some of the commonality of where we'll find districts. There's been about $10.98 billion of districts financing done in the last 10 years. The default rate, I think this is a particularly important one to talk to. The default rate on special district debt is less than 1%. I think if you go and examine that even more clearly, you'll find that the default rate where a lender actually ever lost money is in the hundredths of 1% range. It's an incredibly efficient, incredibly safe way to finance things. I have a little experience in that matter. I think in about a 5-year period of my career, I was involved in the restructuring and workout of about $177 million in defaulted debt at districts. And I'm very familiar with and very sympathetic to things that have gone wrong in districts, who got hurt, how they got hurt, why they got hurt, what's been done to fix that. I certainly am a proponent of measures that can be taken to protect homeowners and measures that can be taken to protect lenders. Although I think that the laws that were passed in the mid 1990s brought a great deal of change to risk and district financing. Mr. Matisse talked about limited tax or unlimited tax general obligation bonds. There's a radical difference between the two, in my opinion. Be happy to talk about that if there are any questions on that. Over the last 15 years, the average borrowing rate for district debt is about a 4.97% rate. Very effective interest rate, very cost-effective way to obtain funds to build public infrastructure. And So I just give you some examples here of things that I think everybody on council is familiar with and things that I've been involved with just in the last few years that have a regional benefit or will have a regional benefit and yet probably would not occur without special district finance. Aerotropolis Parkway, the 38th and E470 interchange, the 48th and E470 interchange, the Powhatan I-70 interchange, I think it used to be called the Harvest Road interchange, regional lift station, recently sanitary sewer lift station, recently built by J.A. Green, the new 64th Avenue project that's being built from E470 to Jackson Gap that you've probably all seen, and I think that's going to open in the next week or two, which will be a huge regional benefit. So I think there are a lot of regional benefits with districts that come with the ability to finance things in a positive and cost-effective manner. With lower borrowing costs, we can develop lots for less. We can, because we can develop lots for less, some of that can result in more competitive prices for lots. Some of it can involve more enhanced amenities in a community. Another thing I think it's important to remember when talking about some of these finance matters, and when I get excitable a lot of times is when people are proposing impact fees, which I think for most purposes are very poor tools for financing infrastructure because they impose a cost day one without any kind of amortization period. A lot of the infrastructure we're dealing with could be, can be, and should be amortized over a 20, 30-year period of time because they have longer benefits than even that. And keep in mind, the average length of time for home ownership in Colorado is 7 to 9 years. It's not 30 years. It's not 40 years. It's not 50 years. I think that's an important factor in framing the discussion and framing how you look at financing. So really nice to have a tool where the homeowner moves in day one, isn't paying 100% of the costs of all the infrastructure used to develop that community day one that can be amortized long beyond when they're going to live there and move. We're all familiar with upkeep, maintenance, all kinds of reasons that a semi-perpetual entity can be very beneficial. A lot of times we enter into IJs with the city, and having an entity that be around for longer than the developer is a huge advantage. Over the last, since 2008 for sure, it has been radically simpler and more feasible to raise capital for public infrastructure using metro districts than a local developer would be able to do. In fact, a lot of those capital markets for financing infrastructure were totally unavailable and out of play for about 8-9 years following 2008. Costs for metro districts, as we talked about, you get to amortize the costs over 30 years. You get to have a lower interest rate. So just give you a quick little schedule. This is just a comparison at Windler, which you're all familiar with, and you're familiar with my involvement. Just on the metro district debt that was financed at Windler, if you look at what it would take to borrow that same amount of money from a private source, if you could find it, which you probably couldn't, but if you could, you'd be paying at least a 12% interest rate. You'd probably have to amortize those costs over 5 years instead of 30. So this little table, this is just a little stab in the dark, but it gives you an idea of the kind of difference in costs between what's available with special district financing and what would otherwise, what the hurdle rates would have to be overcome by a developer without the metro district financing. It's a gigantic difference. Here's another example. Mr. Matisse mentioned that the only reason that you should do a district is if it reduces the cost of the home. And I would argue that that is a positive use of metro district finance. But another positive use of metro district finance would be, as you see at Painted Prairie, that you're all familiar with, it didn't necessarily reduce the cost of the lot to the builder because the developer is trying to maximize profit and the developer is trying to get the best price they can for the lots. But at Painted Prairie, at our High Prairie Park, which many of you are familiar with, because we had metro district financing, we were able to put $12.5 million of improvements into High Prairie Park, which will be enjoyed by the residents of that community into the future, 30, 50, 100 years, maybe 200 years. And those are direct, tangible benefits to the residents. Those are tangible benefits to Aurora and the community. Wouldn't have happened without special district financing. Similarly, as you're starting to see the submittals coming in from our Windler group, you will see that our Discovery Park and 1881 Park, we're estimating that there's going to be about $90 million in investment in those improvements. If we just built the Aurora minimum standard, which is what would probably have to happen without Metro District financing, there'd be more like 25 million invested. That extra lift, that extra 65 million, that is going to create a better community, better bones, better fabric, better structure. We believe a better long-term piece of fabric to the city of Aurora and its residents, certainly the homeowners in those communities. We think that residents in metro districts, when they're properly handled, properly structured, properly done, and I use the word properly there all the way along because Mr. Matisse and I would probably agree on many things and many examples where developers may not have handled things the way it would have been ideal, right? And as I mentioned to you, I have a very, very deep, extensive background in doing defaulted district workouts, and I've been in the rooms with bondholders who thought they were going to lose their life savings, and literally little old ladies who were single who had invested their life savings in Metro District bonds that were then in default. I've been in those rooms. I've been in the rooms with homeowners that were subject to unlimited mill levy GO debt, and they thought they were going to lose their homes and their way of life. Both instances are horrible things. Both instances I spent years of my life working on to help work out and help protect those people. And I feel very strongly that it's important to put proper safeguards in place. Metro districts can pay for enhanced amenities, safety protections, transportation services, a lot of things that may not be paid for or may not be financed and operated as well without a district. I think metro districts help growth to pay its own way. I think they build a great way to share regional infrastructure, cooperate on regional infrastructure, improve the bones and fabric of the city. As cities and counties become more and more challenged and more constrained with their budgets, I think that the Metro District finance allows opportunities to finance things that are needed but would otherwise not be available. Some positives, which also can be a negative. And certainly there can be and have been abuses of these things. But when properly handled, metro districts are a micro level of governance, which I would argue in most instances is a positive thing. When homeowners get to take over and control their own districts, they get to have some self-determination, which I would argue is a good thing and a thing that should happen. The taxes to the homeowners when using micro and local government don't extend beyond the limits of what the governing municipality approved. And I think residents in metro districts, again, those being properly run, have a better chance of their voice being heard than they do with a larger, more remote form of government. And all metro districts have structures where the homeowner should eventually be in control of the district. Now, I will say that I've seen instances where developers or special district attorneys have intentionally designed structures to prolong the amount of time and lengthen the amount of time it takes before homeowners get to be involved in controlling their own destinies and their own districts. I'm not a fan of that. I've actually spoken publicly against that for over 20 years. I wrote the special district and service plan policy for Weld County, and we wrote provisions in to prevent those kind of structures. Not all of my co-developer friends were excited about that. I got a lot of heat for doing that, but I believe there should be self-determination, and that homeowners in the early years should have control turned over to them at the right points in time for self-determination. Metro district meetings require public notice. They require the opportunity for the electors of the district to participate. I think that there have been statutory measures taken to improve those openness and transparency issues. I'm not so sure that more measures couldn't be done that wouldn't be helpful, but and I'm a gigantic fan of discussions and to discuss what can we do to improve transparency and make them more available and more open to the electors in the district. Just getting near the end here, sorry for the length of my squawking. Just some examples of some great communities. Highlands Ranch, Central Park, Painted Prairie, that's a self-serving comment to say great community. The Meadows in Castle Rock, all places where metro districts and special district finance have contributed to the quality of amenities and the quality of life. And without metro districts, I think you would find that there would be a great constriction in the creation of supply of finished residential lots. I think that would further exacerbate the supply-demand problem. And as we all know from microeconomics, if you restrict the supply without changing the demand curve, prices go up. We already have a price problem. So I think districts are really an important tool to help deal with the supply of finished lots, which are then available to home builders to increase the supply of housing. And like I mentioned, there are infrastructures where a city or county is either unwilling or unable to finance improvements that are needed, and districts often step in and do that. When I was getting my master's degree at CU Denver.
Mr. Fellows, I'm sorry, your time has expired.
Thank you.
Questions from council to the presenters?
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, thank you. If I might ask each one a question. So for Mr. Matisse, thank you for the presentation. I think it is important that, you know, residents understand metro districts, and I think part of that is education and certainly, you know, understanding what they're getting into in terms of long-term debt. So you mentioned it. I have to say I was one of two, I think, on this council, because some people are new, so they weren't here when we voted on the excessive debt that you mentioned. And so two of us did not, we voted no on that. But when you mentioned that, I agree. I mean, I think there is a point where, you know, we have to be responsible in making sure that we're approving the right amount of debt to build out the infrastructure and all the amenities and so forth. But we need to be careful on that. You mentioned time of build out, I think, for homes that are not sold as fast as anticipated. And can you go into that a little bit in terms of what that, you mentioned what that does to the current homeowner? Because obviously, as more homes are built faster, then the debt is reduced.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Bergen. In general, when metro districts are created, there often are advance and reimbursement agreements between the developer and the district, and it usually provides that at an appropriate time, the debt will be converted to bonds. Unfortunately, what often happens is, especially during the 2008, 9, 10 Great Recession, and perhaps we're entering another period like that, often development is placed on hold for a long period of time. And what happens sometimes is the developer continues to collect interest on their advance and reimbursement agreements, sometimes for many, many years. I can think of a few examples like Inspiration, the former Rocking Horse. The developer debt just kept accruing because they weren't building anything for the better part of 10 years. And what that does is it shifts the burden from the developers that no longer have that risk. They're now earning interest at 8 or 9% to the homeowners, and the homeowners have difficulty affording it because the interest rate on that is so great. We have an example. I mean, one of the other districts I'm familiar with is Murphy Creek. Murphy Creek, you know, that's a development that's been going on for 24 years. And it still hasn't built out after the, 1998, 1999. And they haven't been able to pay one dime of their principal all these years. And as a result, the debt just keeps accruing and accruing and accruing, and they wind up spending far more than is necessary. So that's the problem that you have there. It obviously, the financial plan needs to be reasonable and not overly optimistic. And that's the job of city council, to scrutinize whether or not the financial plan is reasonable and whether the absorption rate is practical.
So in terms of a recommendation to us, because I mean, we obviously approve the service plans, but we're not going to be, watching all their financing as they go through. So what would your suggestion be in that situation to prevent that?
Well, my recommendation, first of all, would be that you should not approve service plans where the risk is shifted to a developer like that. In other words, interest should not be accruing on developer capital that is going for the purpose of risk. It should go for infrastructure when and if it is developed. It should not be, interest shouldn't accrue on these developer advances during a time of poor market conditions.
Okay, thank you. And Mayor, may I ask a question to Chris Fellow? Hi, Chris. And thank you for your presentation. I certainly understand the need for metro districts in terms of providing housing, and I live in a metro district and get to enjoy a lot of the amenities that are afforded here. Can you speak on the operational mill levies versus the debt mill levies? Because I think there's confusion with homeowners on that. And one gets paid down, but the operating mill levy obviously continues, and sometimes those are refinanced.
Well, so good question, Francoise. And yes, I think there is a lot of confusion on that issue. And I think it would be great to talk about what can we do to help clarify that for homeowners, because I'm a huge believer we need to do everything we can to help homeowners understand what they are or are not getting into. So we really have two components of our overall mill levy. We have the debt service mill levy, and we have the operations and maintenance mill levy. So I'll just break it down real quickly and do an anecdotal answer. At Painted Prairie, that park that we were talking about, that beautiful park, High Prairie Park, that $12.5 million that went into building the park, that came out of bond funds, which will be repaid through the debt service mill levy. But then ongoing, long-term, 10, 20, 30, 50, 80, 100 years, that park will need to be maintained. And that the maintenance for the park comes out of the operations and maintenance mill levy of the district. And that's one that we try and estimate, and we try and get right, and we try and set in a range that will take care of a community at the right level. But it's also one where 15 or 20 years from now, when I'm, long gone from Painted Prairie, the residents of the community who will be in charge of their districts, they may look at it and say, hey, we want an enhanced level of maintenance. And they might increase the O&M mill levy to enhance the level of maintenance at the park. Or they may say, we'd rather have a little less level of maintenance and pay a little lower O&M mill levy. So that O&M mill levy is able to be adjusted up and down, and is not a hard pledge towards a bond issue like the debt service mill levy usually is. And
the O&M, if it is to be increased, would have to go before the voters in that district, correct?
No, it's very likely that there's been some flexibility already built in through the debt and Tabor elections that occur. And then it would be up to the board of directors of the district, which by then should be in the control of the homeowners. And they're electing their own board, and the board is made up of the homeowners. They get to have that self-determination of the mill levy. So that should be something that they're able to adjust up and down. But they don't have to, they set it up right at the beginning. They don't have to go back and re-vote to have that O&M mill levy work properly.
Thank you so much.
Recognize myself to ask both of you a question. And that is, what in your view, Aurora has a uniform service plan agreement this time. What, in your view, has been the impact of that, if any? Chris?
Yes, Mayor Kaufman. I would say one impact is it's made it very easy for developers and applicants and those trying to create a district in Aurora. It's made it very easy for them to know what the rules are going to be and what the expectations are. And it made it very simple to write a service plan, because I think every special district lawyer in the Front Range knows what Aurora's rules are, what their expectations are, what ought to be in the document. So I think it's been a very, very efficient document and process with a lot of transparency as to what's expected in Aurora.
Thank you. Mr. Batiste?
I have to respectfully disagree. I think the model service plan was a good idea when it was originally created, but unfortunately it has devolved into something that is basically a rubber stamp. In other words, if you dot the I's, cross the T's, fill in the model service plan, and you don't even include a detailed financial plan, you don't even include a detailed infrastructure plan, it gets approved by council because they say, well, hey, the model service plan approved it. Tollgate Crossing, which I've been on the board of directors of for the past 16 years, we were before the model service plan. We were organized in the early 2000s, 2001, 2002. And our service plan, which was the service plan that was used before the model service plan, it actually had attachments to it that included the projected debt schedule, when the debt's going to be issued. It had the infrastructure that was going to be developed, and it specifically identified what the mill levies were planned to be over the course of a period of time. It worked very well for us, and we have been able to live within our means, and we've actually been able to pay down that debt and now shift some of the mill levy to operations. What is happening now is you're getting a lump sum number when you create 5 or 10 or 20 districts all at once, a lump sum number of $4 billion without any regard to what the infrastructure is actually going to cost, without any regard to whether or not the debt is going to be able to be financed by any one particular district, without even knowing what the tax base is going to be. For example, Painted Prairie, when you approved the first 9 districts, they were all uninhabitable parcels within the Highline Canal floodplain. And it was to be determined later what properties with which tax base would be included in what district. So you basically were buying a pig in a poke and not knowing whether or not it could be affordable. So I think the model service plan has led to complacency and rubber stamping by city council without careful regard to the metrics that I cite, such as what is the debt to assessed value ratio going to be? What is the amount of infrastructure that's going to be financed? And is the debt limit appropriate?
Mr. Fellows, do you have a response?
I do. It's a very detailed one. I didn't know we were going to have a debate tonight, but I'm happy to entertain it. I think many of Mr. Matisse's comments are completely unfounded. His first comment on what he disagreed with, I think he and I agree. If you looked at the Weld County service plan that I drafted, I think it's appropriate to include a finance plan and a infrastructure plan with a service plan. I think that's appropriate. What a authorized debt number is and what the elected debt questions are and what the debt capacity of the district are all very different things. Using Painted Prairie, which is not in the floodplain, by the way, that wasn't true, but using Painted Prairie as an example, with a master plan community with many moving parts that's likely going to live through a couple of market cycles, very, very well, it's impossible to know exactly what your infrastructure is going to cost, when it's going to be needed, where it's going to be needed, how growth is going to occur. One example is during the life of Painted Prairie, we all originally believed that the commercial district in Painted Prairie would be down on 56th Avenue, down on our southeast corner. Then a little thing happened called the Gaylord Hotel, which was unknown when we were forming our districts, and that changed the focus of where the economic center was. That commercial properly should be developed up near the Gaylord into the town center, which, as you know, we're all working on. If you had pre-established in the whole area exactly where all the districts were, You would have had your mill levies set up. You would have had your boundaries of your district set up. By allowing flexibility to how the district boundaries correspond to growth and the type of growth, I think you can design a much better, much safer, much more appropriate finance plan for the development of the property and for the taxpayers in the property.
Councilmember Coombs? Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mayor. I apologize. I just had to get unmuted. So I have a few questions. Following on that most recent point, I guess my question would be, isn't that the purpose of service plan amendments, is that there is change that occurs, and at that time, surely a council would say, oh, this makes sense. We do want you to build up near Gaylord for this commercial district and not down on 56. And that it's appropriate for the body that has oversight to be assessing those types of decisions to ensure that they are good decisions, because you could have, with that flexibility, just as easily developed in an inappropriate location and moved things from where they were originally proposed.
Is that a question to me, Councilmember Coombs?
Yes.
My answer would be, I think some of that depends on the level of detail and control that the city wants. For example, business improvement districts, the directors of those districts and the annual operating plans have to come back before the city for review on those things. I think in the case of Painted Prairie, I could show you why, or in the case of Windler, I could show you why, knowing that all the property would have to be in a district and knowing that all the property would have to be in a district that's taxing either 35 mils for debt service or 50 mils for debt service, allowed us to have a very flexible financing plan. It allowed us to go to market and get debt. We're very thankful we were able to go get debt last August at 4.25%, because if we did it today, would probably be impossible, or would it be probably 8.5 or 9%? But I think there's some of those decisions that don't need to come back to council, and I think some of those decisions with local thought and input and design and planning are more properly handled by the people right in the middle of that grind and fight. But it's not to say that you couldn't do it the other way. And I've been involved in projects where you put all of the property in the project into one of the districts at the beginning, and you can't change boundaries without the consent of the organizing municipality. And I've done those deals, and I would tell you, I don't think you can find evidence or proof that one is better or worse necessarily than the other. Both can be done viably. You know, we have the situation at Windler where we're not sure which properties for sure are going to go residentially, and they may go, because we're in a mixed use zoning, and they may go commercially. If they go commercially, the debt service mill levy needs to be, you know, at the 35 mil range. If they go residentially, it needs to be at the 50. And that's going to get determined a little by the marketplace. That issue, if council were determining all those things in advance, that might have to come back to council 10 or 15 times of it in the next 15 or 20 years. I'm not sure that can't be done. I'm also not sure it's better.
Further questions, Councilor Coombs?
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Matisse, do you want to give any commentary on that particular issue?
Yes, I do, Member Coombs. If the city council does not know when it approves a service plan what area is going to be included in the tax base of each district at the time it approves the service plan, how can it possibly answer the fourth question that it's required to by statute, which is that the area to be included in the proposed special district, that's singular. That means each district has or will have the financial ability to discharge the proposed indebtedness. It has to know that. I certainly would agree that minor inclusions or exclusions is not a problem, like up to 5 or 10% of the ultimate tax base. But if you're dramatically changing the tax base, and I've known at least one district where right on the eve of homeowners taking control of the board because the election was coming up in May, the developers of the district shifted 90% of the tax base into a different district that they controlled, just so that the homeowners would have no control over it. And it resulted in these homeowners, 40 some lots, having to pay indebtedness that was originally contemplated for 300 and some homes. That's the kind of problems that happen unless city council requires that they have to just come back to city council for approval of amendments to service plans, which, as you know, happens all the time.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you both. So then I have another question that I'll start with Mr. Matisse, just if the source that you cited has any information on what percentage of districts have needed to increase mill levies above the initial approval debt service mill levies to avoid default, and whether or not shorter home ownership periods mean that second and third owners of homes are paying more than original owners in like higher mill levies than original owners.
Member Coombs, I believe you're referring to the Anderson Economic Group report. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
I did not see that level of detail in terms of which ones had to increase their mill levies. I do know that typically there is a financial plan. Unfortunately, the Aurora Model Service Plan doesn't require it, a detailed financial plan that identifies the contemplated year-by-year mill levy. And usually they try to make it so that when it's fully built out, the mill levy drops from, and this is another problem, you know, the Gallagherized mill levy now that sounds like a 50 mill cap in Aurora is really like about a 59 mill cap now. And it's going to go up next year when the Gallagher ratio, the former Gallagher ratio goes down again. That 60 mil cap or close to 60 mil cap, eventually they try to make it so that at full build out, it's down to about 30 or 35 mils. What happens instead is that the cap stays at that high level or even goes up when there's a reduction in the residential assessment rate. And so as a result, they wind up paying far more than was contemplated. So I think that's what the change is. Now, the risk is that the service plan, the model service plan now contemplates that at some time, the mill levy shifts from a limited mill levy cap to a unlimited mill levy cap when the debt to assessed value ratio drops to 50%. That has the possibility in later years, 20 to 30 years out, of the mill levy now becoming unlimited, which potentially could result in the homeowners having to pay much higher than the 60 mil rate. So I don't know if that answers your question. The bottom line is that particular study, the Anderson study, I did not see in at least the executive summary the specific amounts, but that is my understanding as to what they were saying. They were comparing the original service plan analysis and schedule of mill levies, which was the basis of the approval, to what actually took place based on the real world build out.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Fellows, do you have any additional commentary on that issue, on both the need to increase debt service mill levies, or how debt service mill levies may increase the amount that folks pay? And then also, since you mentioned the short time of home ownership, does that short time of home ownership lead to second and third owners ending up having to pay higher rates, not just based on the appreciation of property, but based on Metro Service debt?
Thank you. Yeah, my first comment is Mr. Matisse is incredibly articulate and well-spoken. It's fun to listen to him speak. The second is I think he and I agree on many things. One thing I disagree on is some of his assertions about the debt or a debt authorization and the effect on what homeowners pay, and I want to get into that. The direct answer to your question, Councilmember Coombs, is there should be mathematically no difference and no greater effect to the, let's say that we had a 25-year debt instrument that paid on schedule and on time. There is no shift of burden from and let's say homeowners changed every 5 years. There is no mathematical shift of burden between the homeowner that lives there in the first 5 years, the one that lives in the in the second, third, fourth, or fifth. There is none. The second thing is, so long as we have a limited tax GO mill levy, so let's just say for fun without Gallagher adjustments, I'm pretty sure we changed how that gets redistributed last year in the state of Colorado, so we're no longer going to have the kind of Gallagher adjustments that we used to. But so long as that's flat, let's just assume for the sake of debate, without a few mill levies, whether the debt in the district is $10 million, $50 million, or $100 million, your payment is going to be your debt service mill levy times the appraised value, the assessed value of your home. The amount of debt's not going to affect your payment. Zero, none. Now, one thing that I'm going to say right now, going to make a lot of my developer friends angry, and it's going to make a lot of the underwriters really, really angry. When the laws were changed in the mid-90s and we started working on this limited tax general obligation type of bond issue, I argued then, and I've argued in several of the $614 million in bond issue debt that I've been involved with, many of those we have kept the limited tax structure in the document, and there is no what's in our industry known as the burn-off provision, where when you get to a certain level of debt to assess, the limiting factor on the GO burns off. I've argued publicly, I've done in a lot of my districts. I don't like that public policy. I don't like that. That shifts the risk from the bond buyer, which in most cases now are institutional bond buyers, which is good because they're way more sophisticated, right? They're not retired people with fixed incomes. It shifts the risk from the bondholder back to the homeowner. And you end up in situations like I worked on Castle Pints North, where people thought they were going to lose their homes. There was going to be a spiraling mill levy that was going to foreclose people out of their homes. It was horrible. I would argue, and I think Mr. Matisse he and I would probably be able to agree on this. I'd be a huge fan of having Aurora say in their model service plans, we don't allow the burn-off provision, irrespective of your debt to assess, because that can change too. We're going to have limited tax mill levies, and we're going to limit them to the maximum number allowed, right? Or that plus or minus 50 mill levy. That's plenty. We can finance infrastructure debt with that today. People are buying those bonds today. Why do we need that burn-off provision? So I just made a bunch of my fellow developers and a bunch of underwriters unhappy. But I think Mr. Matisse and I would both agree there are some protections like that. And he'd probably come up with a more intelligent and a better way to describe it. But if there are methods like that we can protect future homeowners, I'm a huge fan. I've been in the room with people that were losing their way of life, and it's horrible. I don't know why we even allow the burn-off provision.
Okay, thank you. That's super helpful. Mayor, can I ask one more?
Please proceed.
So the other question you mentioned, Mr. Fellows, the funding of regional improvements. And I guess my question for both of you, it's more of a philosophical question. Should it be the case that metro districts that are paid by discrete groups of homeowners within that district are funding the regional improvements, or should we as a government be able to find ways to fund those improvements that gets distributed across all of the users of those improvements?
Mr. Matisse, you want to go first, or you want me to go first? Your call.
I'll be fine going first. Doesn't matter. Councilmember Coombs, I think that there's a real risk the city has when it created that regional the regional improvement authorities. It's not clear to me that that's constitutional. If you look at the case law, and it was one of my cases, Landmark Towers Homeowner Association versus Marin Metro District, the courts basically held, and it dates back to a 1900 or early 1900 U.S. Supreme Court case, said that these kinds of special improvement districts like metro districts are not supposed to fund improvements that benefit people outside the district that they can't benefit from. And so in this particular case, one of the examples of a failed bond, the the Marin Metro District, that was a new subdivision that was being built south of the Landmark Towers, and the improvements were for that subdivision. It was declared that the tax levy was unconstitutional, a violation of due process, and they struck it down. And Colorado bond shares, bond buyers wind up eating a lot of many millions of dollars on that. So that's a real problem. I think there's a serious concern as to whether it's constitutional or not. Second of all, I think regional improvements, funding regional improvements that are outside the boundaries of the Metro District causes a problem, because what it does is it encourages the city to perhaps overdevelop when it doesn't have the ability. One of the problems that the city's had, for example, is paying for the cost of road maintenance. You know, these regional improvements are built based on the ARI authorities, and then they turn these over to the city to maintain. And the city didn't have the tax base to put them in the first place, or didn't have the desire to put these improvements in the first place. But now, once they're turned over, the city has to maintain it, and that's one of the reasons, I think, why infrastructure costs, maintenance and road maintenance costs are going up so much. So I think it's not a good idea creating these because it tends to lead to overdevelopment of infrastructure.
So my answer back would be, Mr. Matisse just threw the entire baby out with the bathwater. I think bad facts make bad law, bad behavior, and bad actors make for bad facts. There are certainly individual cases where there have been abuses. I think there are also many cases where there have been huge successes that benefit us. So I think you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Clearly, Landmark was a situation where there were horrible acts and horrible behaviors, and things had to be corrected. But I'll give you a couple quick examples, Councilmember Coombs. At Windler, there is a needed interchange that's been on all the plans of the city and NEATS and CDOT and Dr. Cog for years at 48th and 470. We're in a period where distribution logistics growth is at a real peak. That interchange is needed. Now, the Windler Public Improvement Authority is going to enter into an agreement with the E470 Authority and Adams County and maybe others to help fund that interchange. So a portion of the funding of that interchange will be paid for by future taxpayers within the boundaries of the Windler Public Improvement Authority, and it will confer a benefit upon all of those taxpayers and that area, and it will allow regional commercial growth to occur, which will more than offset costs and taxes paid by the residential homeowners in Windler, and it'll be a great benefit on them. Another example would be if you looked at Porteos, which you're all familiar with, a very successful commercial development in the city. The Porteos development paid for Jackson Gap in order to get the project going. Well, Jackson Gap Street goes from 56th all the way into DIA, and thousands and thousands and thousands of cars use that access and don't pay for it. The city didn't contribute to it. The Velocity Metropolitan District had to pay for 100% of that. Should there be a regional component to it? Probably, but the reality of those complexities would be mathematically unmanageable. So it's another example, though, of great infrastructure that benefits Porteos and benefits the region and the city and DIA alike, and wouldn't have been possible without Metro District financing.
Excuse me, the time, the 1 hour allotted is expired. However, I'm going to extend for 10 minutes to see if other members have questions who haven't asked the question.
Yes, Mayor.
I'm sorry.
Mayor, Councilmember McConnell.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. I want to thank you both, Christopher and Brian, for your presentations and your spirited debate thus far. I have a question for Brian here, and that is, do you see a means for us to amend our model service plan to have a formula to cap the amount of debt that can be issued to the number of homes, kind of as you were mentioning earlier, between that 30 to 60, maybe if we wanted to be very generous, and, estimate worst case scenario with inflation. for each district? And is there an example of a service plan elsewhere in the state that has a similar provision?
Thank you, Councilmember Mercano. I believe I'm a little reluctant to say that there should be an absolute formula cap in the service plan. And that's because I believe it's the responsibility of City Council to make that determination as to whether or not the debt can be discharged. So I would prefer that in the model service plan, there be perhaps a line item where the developer is required to indicate the anticipated amount of infrastructure costs, the anticipated ratio, and then to allow City Council to make that determination. Hopefully staff will comment on whether or not the target ratio is satisfied or not. I do know that there are some municipalities that are looking into or have looked into this. My understanding, I know that the city of Colorado Springs right now they're just about completing their process of revising their standards for approval. And I haven't seen yet the actual cap or the ratio that they use, but I do know that they have a little more stringent ratios and limits than Aurora has. I believe Loveland also, their city does require more stringent approvals of that. And I believe that, actually, I haven't looked at it yet. There's a new policy that was recently approved by, I want to say, I'm drawing a blank right now. One of the cities right outside of Boulder. I'm drawing a blank right now, but in
Superior.
Boulder. Yeah, it's a different one. But anyway, but they are also tightening the requirements, especially with regard to some of those ratios.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, I have a couple more if you don't mind.
Well, please proceed, but time is short.
Understood. I'll be as quick as I can.
Please proceed.
Thank you. So you mentioned earlier these small uninhabitable districts, which were demonstrated in our backup. You are correct. It does appear that those were pretty much following the Highline Canal path there. Are those still permissible under law? And if so, what would you recommend we do?
Are you addressing that to me, Mr.
Yes.
Mercano? Yeah, and I apologize. It might not have been the floodplain, but it does look like it was. I mean, my understanding was these were small individual parcels somewhere along the Highline Canal that were not going to be developed. Yep. It is still allowed. It is still, well, it is. Let me just clarify. It is commonly done under the Aurora multi-district service plan. The state, once again, this has not been litigated, but the state has never clearly defined if someone challenges this practice, whether or not it is lawful or not. So I believe that it's basically a danger that you have when you allow this, because once again, you don't know what properties are going to be in which district and what the ultimate tax base is going to be. Now, there was a second part of that question, I believe. Did I miss that one?
Yes, and that's what would you recommend we do as a solution?
Right, and the solution, I think, is that each district, when you create multiple district service plans, each district needs to have a well-defined tax base at final development. So, for example, in the case of a district that's going to have 9 or 10 different neighborhoods, each of those should have its own geographic boundaries with its own projected tax base at build-out. If there's a significant change through inclusion or exclusion, such as Mr. Fellows suggests might be needed because of development changes like the Gaylord going in, then you need to come back to the City Council for a material modification. I would suggest if the tax base is going to be more than 10% higher or lower.
All right, thank you, sir.
Are there any members who have not asked a question who wish to? Seeing none, thank you both very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Consent calendar item number 2A through 2C. Are there any objections to moving item number 2A through 2C forward? Seeing none, item number 2A through 2C will move forward. Item number 3A, resolution to transfer a certificate of designation for biomedical waste treatment. Karen Hancock.
Good evening, Mayor Kaufman and City Council. My name is Karen Hancock, and I'm a planner in the Planning and Development Services Department. I have a very brief presentation and no slides. The state regulates waste treatment land uses and requires local jurisdictions to issue a certificate of designation for waste treatment land uses. Aurora has exactly one waste treatment land use, and that is a business that treats biomedical waste using ozone. The treatment takes place inside of an enclosed machine, and the machine is located inside of a building. The byproducts of waste treatment using ozone are water and oxygen. The business is located directly across the street from the ICE facility near Peoria and Smith Road and near the Fitzsimmons Anschutz Medical Campus. This is the only biomedical waste treatment process using ozone in the state of Colorado. In 2014, the city issued the certificate of designation to the business owner, Colorado Medical Waste. The owner of the biomedical waste treatment business wants to sell the business to Trilogy Med Waste. The new owner cannot operate the waste treatment process without the city transferring the certificate of designation, to the new owner. In 2014, council issued the certificate of designation via resolution. Before you this evening is a new resolution to transfer the certificate of designation from Colorado Medical Waste to the new owners, Trilogy Med Waste, headquartered in Houston, Texas. The new owners will operate the business and the biomedical waste treatment process in essentially the same manner as the former owners. The Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment reviewed the engineering and environmental plans on the city's behalf, and included in your agenda backup is a letter from CDPHE recommending that the city approve transfer of the certificate of designation to the new owners. CDPHE opened a 30-day public comment period for the public to review the engineering and environmental plans. No public comments were received. The business has had no code enforcement actions and has operated in accordance with their permits since 2014. The business may not operate and generate revenue until the resolution transferring their certificate of designation is approved by City Council. City Attorney's Office staff has determined that a public hearing must be held when the resolution is presented at a regular meeting of the City Council. Please note that the requirement to transfer the certificate of designation is solely a state requirement and not required by city zoning regulations. All city zoning regulations were met back in 2012, 2013, before the initial development application was approved. The question before you this evening is, do you wish to forward this draft resolution to a regular meeting of the City Council for a public hearing? Please note that staff has tentatively added this item to the August 8th meeting to streamline City Council review timeline for this business customer. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions for staff? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item number 3A forward? Seeing none, item number 3A will move forward. Thank you, Karen. Item number 5A, Rules of Order Procedure Amendment, Consent Calendar. Councilmember Gardner.
Thank you, Mayor. I do know that this proposed rule change was debated at a study session about a month ago. And since that time, there was one change added. But before I get into that, I just kind of want to give a brief summary of the why behind this. So as most of us know, as Aurora has grown, our agendas have gotten much more complex. However, the vast majority of items, after having been presented upon in policy committee, after receiving a debate and conversation at a study session, still come to council for a formal presentation by staff as well as a vote by council. And the vast majority of those items, it's frankly, a token presentation by staff. And that's certainly not a criticism of staff. It's just at that point, it's been presented and debated. And then those items many times receive a 10-0 vote and we move on. By that point, however, there's been plenty of opportunity for council members to weigh in. And so to me, this really does a couple of things. One, it will streamline our agendas and ensure that items that need further debate, that have big public interest, will receive more time allotted to them, and will also be done at a more reasonable hour. Many of you know we've had council meetings till 1, 2, or 3 in the morning for more controversial items, and there are times where we are being presented with contracts in the tens of millions of dollars at 1 o'clock in the morning, and it's appropriate, I think, for those to be done differently. And I think it also respects our staff a little bit more. This will give them a lot more certainty when they have to present an item, while also maintaining the ability for any council member at any time to pull an item, to have a formal presentation at a council meeting. Also, it will maintain the ability for any item that has a public comment to be pulled for a presentation and a vote. I think what happened at our council meeting last week is a good demonstration of how this would work. There were 2 consent agenda items that had a public comment. Both of those items were pulled off. We heard the public comment. There was an opportunity for council questions as well as council debate, and then a formal vote was taken on that individual item. And so I think that really demonstrates how this would work. I will note, however, there are a couple of items, I should say, that will not be allowed to be put on a consent calendar, and those 2 items are public hearings and annexations. Those will still require an agenda item, and so you'll kind of see if you look on, I think this is page 104 of your packet. It lists the items that would be allowed under a consent calendar, and then the rest of our order of business. The one change I do want to note, because I know this came up at study session last time and wanted to make sure that there was a process in place. So council members, if they want to call an item up, whether that's for discussion, they want an individual vote so they can vote no, whatever the case may be, need to notify the city clerk by 1 p.m. on the day of the council meeting. However, that does not impact the ability for a resident to call in and make public comment. And if, like I said before, if there is public comment on an item, it would be removed from the consent calendar and individually voted on. That's not changing from our current process. So it's really, I think, a change that will make our meetings more streamlined, more efficient, while also ensuring that we give proper time and attention to the items that the public wants to comment on and participate in. That's all I really have. So I guess available for any questions there might be.
Hey, Councilmember Gardner, there was no discussion of your proposal in a prior meeting. It was merely, we merely decided to continue it to this meeting. Are there any questions or
Yes.
comments for Councilmember Gardner?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Gardner. We did have a little bit of discussion on it before it got tabled, but I guess I want to clarify, just to make sure I'm understanding on the public invited to be heard, because right now we changed the process so that they need to sign up on Friday if they want to speak on an item. But I think, and maybe somebody could correct me if I'm wrong, if and we allow 1 hour, if we only had, let's say, 3 people that signed up on Friday, but yet people showed up on Monday and didn't know the process, if they showed up, they would still be allowed to do public invited to be heard, I think, under the current process. So I just want to make sure that if someone doesn't know to, have it in by Friday and they show up, are they still afforded the ability? Because then the staff wouldn't be there if they pull something.
So this does not impact public invited to be heard whatsoever. Public invited to be heard is still a public comment session that's available before our council meetings. And I think it's right here in the rules. First come, first served basis. Speakers shall be limited to a maximum of 3 minutes, and that's on non-agenda items. Our current process, an individual can sign up for public comment on an agenda item up until that item is heard. And so that would not change. So, for example, if Monday night came and there was a resident that wanted to speak on an agenda item outside of public invited to be heard, which of course is on non-agenda items, that wouldn't change. And so, there would be cases where staff would need to still be on standby, possibly to present if that happened. But that wouldn't impact public invited to be heard.
Right.
It's still be limited to 1 hour as it's outlined in our rules. And I unless I'm mistaken, that's not in our rules that they have to sign up on the Friday before. I don't know where that came from.
I don't know, I think I remember that from something. So basically, they're still afforded the opportunity to make public comment. We wouldn't, but then, well, I guess it wouldn't matter because if they made a public comment, we sometimes then ask questions of staff, but then the staff would not be available because they didn't think it was, they didn't see that it was pulled.
Well, I think staff would still be available. I mean, our staff would still attend the council meetings. And if there was a public commenter that signed up, it would be pulled from the agenda and the staff would have to present on it. I mean, very similar to how our consent calendar works right now. It happened last Monday night where there were 2 items on our consent calendar and the staff members still had to be on standby and when those items were pulled, they had to give a presentation and there was a formal vote. So essentially, it's not really changing much of anything other than moving those items onto the consent calendar under our current consent calendar process.
Okay, and then one more question, which is, if for some reason a council member does not go to policy committee and study session and they just bypass that and go straight to the council, a regular meeting, would that automatically be pulled for presentation?
I would be open to amending this for that reason. I mean, I think that's relatively uncommon, but of course, any council member can pull an item under these rules up until 1 p.m. the day of the meeting. So for example, if I brought an item straight to the floor and didn't go through that process and you or any other council member didn't like that or wanted a presentation, all you would do was let the city clerk know that you were pulling that and you wanted a presentation. So yeah,
Yeah,
that would be
that
well
was
within,
Yeah,
yeah, so that, yeah.
okay. And also to be clear, if anyone is voting no, they must pull the item.
Correct. I mean, just like under our current consent calendar.
Okay,
If you want to vote no on an item, you have to pull it.
thank you.
Mayor Kaufman?
This is, let me just comment real quick. I'm just not sure what problem we're trying to fix here. I get that it makes it easier on council, might make it easier on staff, but I fail to see the benefit to our residents. Because unless they followed it in policy committee and then in study session, that they're getting no benefit of even an abbreviated presentation. So I think it actually harms the process.
Well, I disagree with that, and I'd like to respond to that before Councilmember Lawson. I disagree with that pretty strongly. It still maintains the ability for a resident to comment on an item, and using your logic, then any items we shouldn't have a consent calendar at all, because unless a resident has been following the process, any items currently on our consent calendar, they wouldn't be aware of the conversation and discussion. So in fact, I think helping ensure that our staff has more certainty and also ensuring that we're not debating what in many cases are very serious items at 11 and 12 o'clock at night when many of our residents are working, have to get up for work the next day and can't follow council. I think that does help our residents.
Further questions, comments?
Mayor Kaufman?
Councilmember Lawson.
Okay, I have a question, Councilmember Gardner. So I have a little bit of an issue with this. We've already limited public input to be heard. So we already done that for an hour. Now we're gonna put this stipulation on here where we still are inviting public input to be heard, but it still has some limitations to me. I guess for council members you've been on serve for almost 4 years and I've served for 7. Sometimes we get information up to the point of the meeting. It may be some new information or something where we might have additional questions. And you're stipulating for the council member that we have to do this by 1 o'clock. I guess for me, I have a real issue with that because that's just putting a stipulation on the council member who may, like I said, sometimes you might think about no over the weekend or maybe up to this point, but you may get some information prior to the council meeting, which could change your mind or you might have additional questions. So I guess there is no wiggle room. Why are you choosing 1 o'clock? I'm just asking about that. Why is 1 o'clock the number?
I would be open to a different time, but in fact, if you do have questions or you thought about it over the weekend, this gives you the opportunity to pull it off. That's what this is for. And so you would have that opportunity. I'd be open to adjusting that time. I picked a time after discussing with staff that they thought was reasonable. But I certainly would be open to adjusting that time. However, had new thoughts over the weekend, this would allow you to pull it off for a presentation to ask those additional questions. So this really addresses that. And in fact, this process is pretty similar to the consent operation, how several other city councils operate. I researched several other cities, including Denver here in the metro area. They operate their council meetings the same way with cutoff times for call-ups. And it seems to work there.
Okay, I understand it works there, and I understand that might be you might have your decision by over the weekend, and there, sometimes things come up, where it's up to the last minute, where there's additional questions and information. So I understand where you're coming from on that, and maybe other councils do that. I guess the question is, if you are a city council person and you don't pull something by 1 o'clock, then you're subjected to whatever your vote is, that's going to be the vote for everything on there, even though you may disagree with the item. I'm just really stuck with that piece. So that's why, for me, I understand we want efficiency. I understand what we want to, we want to create this efficient model. But I will be a no on this. I won't be supporting it. I just think that it leads to, we're kind of limiting some of the voices of our residents. You're kind of not giving council members an opportunity to maybe, kind of forcing us into a time frame. And I understand we're up late, but that's the job that we do. So I struggle with this, so I won't be supporting it. I know it probably will pass, but just because of those reasons, I won't be supporting it. But thank you for bringing it forward.
Mayor, can I respond to that?
Please.
So again, to reiterate, this has zero impact on the voices of our residents. Our residents will still have the opportunity for public invited to be heard on non-agenda items, and up until an item is called, they still can call in. So this has zero impact on the ability of the public to comment. And as far as the 1 p.m. cutoff time, like I said, that was in discussions with staff, though I'm certainly open to adjusting that if there are suggestions. Councilmember Lawson, if you have a suggestion on a time that you would feel more comfortable with.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Councilmember Gardner, for bringing this forward. My concern as it currently stands is, the 1 o'clock deadline comes and goes. Staff is not present then to handle a situation like we had a couple of weeks back, where folks come up to testify and start based off of their testimony, we end up with questions that staff needs to answer for us because they might be items that we had not necessarily considered without constituent input. So to me, the concern is not so much limiting our constituents' ability to speak, because to your point, they would still be able to do that, but it's allowing us to actually ask follow-up questions of staff and engage with the comments that they brought up that we might not have considered beforehand. And I don't think this allows that to happen then, because you wouldn't have that staff present.
So again, we currently utilize a consent agenda. I feel like I'm the only one that remembers that we utilize a consent agenda. So there are currently items that never receive a formal presentation. And the only way that those receive an individual vote is if a council member calls them up at the meeting, or there is public comment, like happened last Monday. We had public comment on 2 consent agenda items. Otherwise, those items never receive a formal vote. So all this is doing is expanding our current consent agenda process. It is not changing the ability for additional questions, additional presentations, anything like that.
Further questions or comments?
Mayor, I have a comment, because I think it's Zavonic, sorry.
Councilmember Zavonic.
I think this is where some people are getting hung up on the 1 o'clock, and this goes back to, I think, both Councilmember Marcano and Lawson's point, which is, you're right, we use the consent calendar, and I understand what you're trying to do, but we can all the way up until the point of the consent calendar being there. So there's no cutoff at 1 o'clock. I think that's what they would like to do. And I know that originally the thought was by having the 1 o'clock, it could save staff, but I think to your later point is, it could get called up because of a question from public invited to be heard. So maybe, and again, this is just me throwing out there for conversation, the 1 o'clock is actually not necessary, as opposed to the overall concept of putting everything there. It can be removed up until the moment that it's, consent calendar comes up.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that was added because of some of the comments when it was at discussion last time, but you're correct, Councilmember Zavonic. Currently, staff still is available for presentation on an item if there is public comment like happened last Monday. And so there will not be an instance where staff is not available because, again, if there is a public comment, that item automatically gets pulled. And so that scenario won't happen. So I understand the hang up, and I'm fine removing that. My original version did not have that in there because, again, if there is a public comment, staff has to be available for a presentation, as is what happened last Monday night.
Further discussion.
Mayor,
Councilmember Coombs.
thank you. So I think that removing the 1 p.m. helps, and that actually I was also going to suggest. But I still do have a concern in the sense that our residents aren't typically watching our policy committee meetings for sure. And folks who watch council meetings don't necessarily watch study sessions. And so it removes the most likely opportunity for a member of the public to get information about what it is that we're voting on. I know that when I was a resident attending meetings before I was on council to talk about a specific issue, I learned a lot and dug into other issues based on the presentations that were given by staff during the meetings that I was at. And so I do think that for the purpose of transparency, of educating the public and informing them about the decisions that we're making, I do think that it is beneficial to have votes and presentations on the items that we currently have. Now, your point about the consent calendar is well taken. There are actually some very big and important issues that end up on consent calendar. So I would lean more toward having requirements of more things coming off of consent calendar and into a presentation for the public so that they understand what the business of the city is than I would toward condensing more things into that consent calendar.
Further discussion. Seeing no further discussion.
Mayor, I'm sorry.
Who's that?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thanks. I'm having a hard time with this because originally I was in favor of it when it came up, at the study session before. I'm having difficulty with having the flexibility at that last minute to be able to change my vote to a no, because I would be locked in by 1 o'clock to be basically, okay, I'm voting yes on whatever consent items that weren't pulled. And I think that's my hang up.
Again, like I said, I'm fine removing that from there. And it would work exactly how our consent calendar works now. Items
Okay.
can be pulled at the council meeting.
Okay, so you would allow that change?
Oh, certainly. That wasn't in the original version. That was a result of the conversation last time, but my original version did not have a 1 p.m. cutoff time.
Okay, I thought it was going to be
And
like
that's why in the version that's in your packet tonight, it's in blue because it was added after the last study session.
Further discussion. Seeing none, is there opposition? Mayor object.
Mayor, I object. It's Councilmember Lawson.
Councilmember Lawson.
I
I
object,
also
Mayor.
object, Coombs.
Councilmember Coons.
Medina.
Councilmember Kuno. Is there further objection?
Medina.
Excuse me?
Councilmember Medina.
Murillo.
Further objection? A majority of a resident objection. Item number 5A will not move forward. Item number 5B program. The time is as 8:03. Council will stand in recess until 8:10. The study session of the Aurora City Council for Monday, August 1st, 2022 is called back into session. 5B program update for roadway maintenance certificate of participation project. Councilmember Zavonic.
Yeah, Mayor, I believe that this is going to be an update from staff on the progress towards and future plans of the roadway maintenance plan that we passed a month ago or so. So I'll turn it over to staff.
Cindy Collins.
Yes,
Director of
thank you,
Public Works.
Mayor, and thank you, Mayor and City Council, for having us here tonight. I'm joined by Kim Stewart, and we're here to give you an update on the roadway maintenance plan that we have developed based on the certificate of participation funding option that we will be looking at. This is the first of many updates that we will be giving to you as we work through this program and process. Just a reminder of where we started. Back at the winter workshop, council supported Councilmember Zavonic's proposal to explore options to address the deferred roadway maintenance that we have. As we were working through that, we also, through Public Works, proposed an approach for pavement maintenance based on roadway conditions, giving priority to the roadways in the worst conditions. Funding options were also explored, as well as a creation of the Transportation Maintenance Fund. All these were presented to the Transportation Policy Committee, as well as moving that forward to study session in May. During that time, as a funding option, City Council approved debt funding to generate $35 million in proceeds from a certificate of participation fund for the additional roadway maintenance and the deferred maintenance that we have, as well as that creation of the Transportation Maintenance Fund. And the June 4th spring workshop, council supported moving forward with a communications and public engagement plan and the development focused on the implementation of the funded roadway maintenance projects. And then the ordinance approving the use of lease purchase financing for the construction of the roadway improvements was approved in June. So this graphic here shows you our 5-year maintenance plan. So across the top, this program has been developed to go from 2023 to 2027. And as you'll see down along the side, it is broken into pavement, which includes mill overlay, surface treatment, in-house work that we do, and street reconstruction. Concrete repair that we do, very important to do the concrete repair ahead of the pavement maintenance so that we repair the cracked sidewalk, curb, and gutter and have a clean slate when we're coming in with the paving. It also is broken out into the CMCI, construction management, construction inspection services that we utilize to support and keep tabs on the work as it moves forward, making sure that it's to the standards that we have. Within the different programs here, you'll see that the COP allocations are also broken out, and that $35 million is distributed between 2023 and 2024, with our plan to be to use those COP funds by the end of 2024. And that funding is going to be dedicated to the neighborhood streets, in addition to some other funding that we have already established. Down at the bottom, what we wanted to illustrate for you is that how we're going to approach the classifications. We're looking at locals, collectors, and arterials, but you'll see the locals have the maximum amount for many of these years as it evens out as we get more of the deferred maintenance taken care of. We're going to continue to address the residential roads through the time moving forward, just reestablishing that program that we that went away in 2016. This I want to show you is again a map showing what the 5-year plan looks like. Again, 100% of those COP funds to be used by the end of the year of 2024. All the different strategies that we've talked about, including mill and overlay, surface treatment, street reconstruction, concrete curb and gutter and sidewalk. Annual residential paving program is reestablished. And what's important here is you'll see in 2023, much of the red is within the neighborhoods. But I also want to emphasize for you, these are the we're addressing these roads in 2023 based on priority of their current condition. But then as we move forward, we're going to continue addressing the residential streets in 2024, 2025, even 2026 and 2027. This is a preliminary 5-year plan, but it gives us a really good idea of what we're targeting for. And then if different issues or priorities come up, say for Aurora Water or Excel, we can flex the program as we need to. This map is specifically focused on 2023 and 2024. You'll see all of the green areas are the residential neighborhoods. We have a few arterials and collectors as well. And what we're looking at here is actually 35 subdivisions that will have concrete repair and mill and overlay. All the strategies will be employed. And I do want to note, just because it's been years for some of the neighborhood streets to be mill and overlaid, some of those will require street reconstruction. But as part of the community engagement and public outreach plan, we'll be doing a lot of outreach and good work with the community for their understanding of what the end product is going to be. This is just a little pie chart to show you 60% almost is going to the local streets. We've got some collectors and a few arterials. I also want to point out that we do have contingency just in case we have any unforeseen conditions that come up. So we're holding a little bit of contingency just if we need it. If it's unneeded, we'll flex it into the program and use it on other roadways. So next steps. What you've seen now are the preliminary locations, not only for 2023 and 2024, but also through 2027. We're going to be refining those locations through the fall. We're just kind of at the beginning, especially for 2023 and 2024. Part of that is going to be coordinating with other departments and programs. One of the first steps that we're doing right now is collecting all the concrete repair needs for curb, gutter, and sidewalk, getting those bids prepared so we can bid them out late this summer. Also refining and finalizing the quantities and preparing the bid tabs to advertise later this year for the mill and overlay, the surface treatment, and the street reconstruction. So we're at the beginning stages. We're going to be bringing updates back to you. You're probably going to see some changes as things get finalized, just as we get a better understanding if Aurora Water has some needs in some areas and other utilities as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim, and she's going to walk through the communications plan.
Thank you, Cindy. Next slide, please. So Mayor and City Council members, thank you for an opportunity to speak with you about the outline of our communications plan. The goals we have for this plan are really to educate residents on the value of caring for what we have. That would be the treatments or the strategies Cindy spoke of applied to pavement conditions based on the need at the time. We also want to make sure we explain how the city can provide for what we need through additional resources and different funding sources added to our toolkit. We want to make sure we build community awareness and excitement by fulfilling work that addresses residents' priorities. You'll remember the survey we did earlier this year. We heard from residents that transportation roadways are a top priority. We also want to demonstrate making the most of taxpayer dollars. We know that's very important. We want to be very accountable to our public and deliver on the city's responsibilities about this work. We will track and report progress on projects and celebrate the successes that happen in the next couple of years and beyond. And with that, we want to create a project identity with a brand. Next slide, please. So our proposed concept for a brand is here: build up Aurora, care for what we have, and provide for what we need. We felt that that had a note of responsibility and being good stewards of what our residents are providing in tax dollars. So the brand communicates that the city is becoming stronger and better, continuously improving and making progress, delivering on promises to care for the investments we've made in our existing infrastructure, and to provide what's needed now and into the future. being responsible and accountable taxpayer dollars by maintaining these community assets and delivering residents' priorities. Next slide, thank you. And so these are our target audiences. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's a primary list here of residents, Aurora businesses, our homeowners groups, city and community leaders, certainly our boards and commissions. The media will be very important, city employees, many of whom are residents in the city, and community and civic organizations, as well as our partners, the Chamber, Visit Aurora, et cetera, to help amplify the message and help celebrate those successes we're making on roadway improvements. Next slide, thanks. So these are not the actual messages, but they're key elements of the messages that you will be seeing. The city will pursue all existing financial options to address infrastructure priorities before referring measures to voters. That was something discussed in the June workshop, if you remember those guiding principles that were presented. Utilize existing funding solutions to care for what we have, as is being done here with councilors' leadership through the COPs. Also to have a conversation about how can we do more, that adding additional solutions to our toolkit, funding solutions, will help us provide for what we need. Listening to residents' project priorities, roadway maintenance to improve existing neighborhoods will be prioritized by street condition, as Cindy explained, and that these projects are just the start, that this residential street program will resume and be part of our annual road work. Next slide. So a number of the tactics, this again is not exhaustive, but we want council's feedback along the way, is that branded project signage will be out in neighborhoods before, during, and after the project work to show progress. And as we've been talking through these as a team, one thing we envision is signs in neighborhoods. When it's done, a big sign across it saying, completed as promised. We talked about partnering with community relations to make sure we over-commute with neighborhood groups and residents on project information, schedule, impacts, where will detours have to occur, what does that actually mean in that neighborhood. Also ribbon cuttings with elected officials and where possible, neighborhood leaders and HOA folks to be able to let them help kick off a project. Social media, Nextdoor is extremely active in Aurora, so great place to help share the word on what's happening. Multilingual communications, of course, will be throughout the plan, and be working with media outlets, newsletter updates, those that are city produced, as well as the neighborhood HOA newsletters that they put out. We get a lot of response from those when we do communicate there. Engage Aurora page will stand one up, and that is where we'll have an interactive project map and timeline of progress and successes of those projects. So people can go on at their leisure and kind of take a look at what's happening around currently and in the future. And of course, Aurora TV can help educate and do project profiles as these projects are kicked off and as they continue, with a lot of updates to council, not only on Cindy's end with the projects, but certainly what we're hearing and what we're doing with our community engagement and information. Next slide, Cindy.
Thanks, Kim. So back to me. So project timeline that we're sorry, I'm getting some feedback. Tonight we're here for council study session. On Wednesday, we have our rating call with Moody's, which we'll be participating in. That I think is at 11 a.m. Through August and September, and probably a little bit beyond that, we will be working for the concrete contractor repair or concrete repair procurement contracts. We'll probably put that out to multiple contractors so we can distribute them throughout the city. September 7th will be the COP closing, funding received. Through the fall, we'll begin that concrete repair as we get the contracts awarded. In December, the pavement contract procurement will begin. We'll probably get those bids early next year. In February of 2023, we'll bring the rehabilitation plan finalized. As I mentioned, the map that we have now will be refined as we're working through the details, and it will be much more firmed up later this year and early next year. So we'll bring that to TAPS as well, the policy committee, as well as a council study session. And then February, March, looking for the contract award and hoping to start in April with all of these great improvements that we're super excited to bring to the community. And so opening up for any feedback or discussion. Thank you.
Questions of staff?
Mayor.
Sorry. Councilmember Jaworski.
Thank you. Yeah, I am in full support of this. I just wanted to say, as we are getting bids and going through that process, I would really like to see an Aurora business. I mean, if they're in the ballpark, a concrete business in Aurora, if they're in the ballpark, and one thing to remember is, that the city sales tax dollars would be coming back to the city anyways, and I would just really love on some of these projects to start supporting local Aurora businesses. That's all.
Further questions?
Mayor?
Sorry. Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, thank you. Cindy, when you're putting out bid these contracts for the concrete work, do you lock in the pricing at that time, or how does that work?
Yeah, we'll be getting bids from the contractors, and the pricing that they provide will be through the extent of the contract.
And then you evaluate their ability to obviously provide quality, because I don't know if you probably saw, I had an email today, but from a constituent that thinks the paving that was done was not good.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that, Mayor Pro Tem. But yeah, I mean, that's why we have the construction management, construction inspection, and our materials lab to help us make sure that everything is going into our standards.
Thank you.
Further questions of staff? Any comments, discussion? Seeing none, this was for information only, so thank you very much for the presentation. Item number 5C, sales and use tax exemption, direct government fees. Councilmember Zavonic.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So this issue of the city assessing a sales tax to government fees came to my attention recently with the recently implementation of the delivery fee that the legislature passed last year. It's a 27-cent fee on all deliveries. And it was brought to my attention that we apply a sales tax to that. And looking into it, it appears as though there are other government fees that the city applies our sales tax rate or our sales tax to. Typically, I'm not in favor of creating any sorts of exemptions. I would much rather do an across-the-board sales tax reduction for everything. But I don't think it's in any way defensible for us to be taxing not a product, not a service, but a government fee. And so what this ordinance would do is for existing government fees and anything that would be created in the future. For instance, the state legislature passed another fee that will kick in January of next year on grocery bags. That fee would also be exempt from municipal sales tax. So the ordinance just simply exempts all of those government-related fees from the total purchase price to be exempt from sales tax. And I'll turn it over to staff to talk about the financial implications of it.
Good evening, Mayor. Jeff Edwards, Manager of Tax. So the implications on this are estimated to be around $220,000. That will go up as the fee, that particular delivery fee that Councilmember Zavonic referenced, is slated to go up based off of increases in inflation. So I can answer any other questions, or if you have any other information that you would like me to provide, I'd be glad to help out.
Questions of staff for the sponsor?
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm in full support of this. I don't even like that we do fees, because I think it's a way to get around Tabor and getting voter approval on something that is not a tax because it's a fee. And certainly we shouldn't be taxing a fee. So I'm in full support.
Councilmember Coombs.
Yeah, so in principle, absolutely, I support not taxing fees. But I did today make a purchase, and the sales tax was charged on the amount of my purchase, and then this fee was listed separately. So I don't know, like, do we know where it is that this taxing of the fee is happening? And why would some entities break it out that way and not do it, and other entities tax the fee?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Coombs, that's an excellent question. Unfortunately, it's really difficult to control exactly how that tax would be broken out on an invoice, and most likely would be lumped into the total tax amount on the invoice itself.
Mayor, if I could.
Councilmember Devonic.
Yeah, Councilmember Coombs, as I was researching this, and Jeff, I might ask for to jump in on this, but there's a standard definition on total purchase price, and not excluded from that is fees. And so typically so for instance, on this delivery fee, it's included in the total purchase price. So if you order a sandwich and a bag of chips and a drink from somewhere, and let's say that totals $10, you add the fee in, the total purchase price is the product plus the fee, and then sales tax is then applied to that. So there are times where the fee is broken out separately, but it's still assessed tax. In the case of Aurora, when doing this, we have the waste hire fee, the new delivery fee, and then the future bag fee that the ordinance as drafted would exempt from municipal sales tax.
Mayor, can I respond? So yeah, so my point is that in the purchase that I made, the fee was listed separately and after the tax. So the fee wasn't being taxed. So I guess I'm just confused about whether or not this is happening on that delivery fee, because in my experience of making purchases for delivery, that's not what I'm seeing happen. So we can pass this, and that's fine, to make sure that other fees aren't being taxed. But my concern is that we're saying something is happening that isn't happening.
Further discussion.
Mayor,
Mayor Pro Tem.
I wonder, because that just passed, so maybe some entities haven't caught up with it yet, possibly.
And Mayor.
Councilmember Devonic.
Yeah, and CML is actually drafting model legislation for other municipalities to do this, because it is in fact being taxed. And I know that Denver is taking this up tomorrow to exempt. Theirs is more narrowly focused on the bag fee that they have in place and the delivery fee, but the delivery fee is in fact a part of the total purchase price and being taxed. And now, whether or not in this, wherever you were, to Mayor Pro Tem's point, there are some point of sale or point of sale software services that vendors have that might not have caught up to it yet to have it, included, but it is in fact happening, and that's why they have the estimate of what we would actually be saving from the city on this.
Further questions or comments? Seeing none, is there opposition to moving item number 5C forward? Seeing no opposition, 5C will move forward. Item number 5D, reimbursement agreement between 720 Foundation and the City of Aurora and other related matters. Councilmember Medina.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm just want to see us reimburse the 720 Foundation. I just feel that in light of this 10th year anniversary and the things that happened to our residents, that we would charge $25,000 to maintenance the sculpture that's in the 720 Memorial. I just think that, to me, the city, they made an agreement with the 720 Memorial, and I guess they agreed to pay $25,000 to chunk over 5 years to pay for the maintenance, and then the city would take it on. And I just feel that having known a lot of the people and the families and survivors, that they could better use that money for things like that to help that part of that community. And so I'm just asking my colleagues to hopefully look at that and see if we can reimburse that funding. Thank you.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, is there any objection to 5D moving forward? Seeing none, 5D will move forward. Seeing no other further business before the Aurora City Council study session, meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Night, y'all.